Good afternoon, everybody. This is probably one of the odder presentations I've done. As Stu said, there's no audience, so you'll have to excuse me, and I'm not allowed to touch any buttons in case I switch things off. And I've also been told I've got quite a lot of slides, so we better push on. So today I'm really here to discuss a little bit about the computerized CBT and the implementation process in particular. We all know that there's a situation, not just in Scotland, but across basically the globe in relation to depression and anxiety. The demand for services is continuing to rise, and we're in a position now we have to start looking for alternatives in terms of treatment delivery, and technology is a potential solution to that. CBT, for those that don't know, stands for Computerized Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. It's a treatment that's delivered online via a software program. It can be used as a standalone treatment for mild to moderate symptoms, but we also use it in Scotland as a conjunction with face-to-face therapy. In Scotland, CBT has actually been around for a fair length of time. The first services were set up in Forth Valley and Tayside. Forth Valley in 2005 and Tayside in 2007. In 2014, we received funding from an EU project called MASTERMIND. This project was to last 3 years and really was to test the implementation process of CBT. In 2016, during the MASTERMIND project, we actually received funding from the TECH programme for a full rollout of CBT across Scotland. My role in all this, I was originally responsible for developing and coordinating the services in Forth Valley and then Tayside. I also designed the national model of implementation, and in conjunction with that, developed a step care model for patients with mild to moderate symptoms that was based on technology as a cornerstone of delivery. My role has changed somewhat since then. I am now responsible for the national rollout of CBT through the MASTERMIND and CBT TECH projects. So just a little bit more about MASTERMIND. MASTERMIND actually stood for something. This is the acronym here. I'm not going to read it out because I think within the 3 years of the project I never did. It's a bit of a mouthful. But really what I was designed to do was to implement at scale computerized cognitive behavioral therapy. It was a large project with a large budget, but also with a large number of members involved in the consortium. So there's 22 partners involved in the consortium. CBT was set up across 14 trial sites across 9 EU member states. But really what I was designed to do was to try and understand why, if CBT has so much evidence and is recommended by NICE and SIGN in the UK and in other guidelines across Europe, was it not being implemented at scale? So what MASTERMIND attempted to do was to understand the barriers and facilitators for large-scale deployment. What MASTERMIND meant for Scotland was opportunity to develop understanding about CBT, and to gain more experience across a wider range of health board areas. What we were able to do with the EU project was implement CBT across 4 additional health board areas. What was important was during the selection process that we actually had a range of health boards that had different styles of demographics, different size and different scales. Hence we have a Lanarkshire and a Shetland. At this point, the MASTERMIND project covered 1.6 million of the Scottish population. The MASTERMIND project was really designed to work and to develop the CBT further in relation to the experiences of Forth Valley and Tayside, so really build upon those experiences and take CBT to a different level within Scotland. It's fair to say that MASTERMIND was fairly successful in Scotland. Our recruitment target was 800 patients across a 24-month period, and actually across the 24 months we recruited 100. That was 6,107 patients that commenced with treatment rather than referral, and we'd actually achieved our 800 target in the 7th month of the 24-month. So as I was saying, MASTERMIND was quite a large success in Scotland. We recruited 6,100 patients in comparison to our target, which was 800. And we actually achieved a target on the month 7 of the 24-month trial. But this was even more stark when you compare our performance against other European countries. These are our 5 closest competitors, I guess you call them, across the European implementation sites. The little green bar is our target, and the black bar is what we recruited. So just a little bit now about the CCBT Tech project. The CCBT Tech project, we received funding through the Tech programme in August 2016. And it's worth noting at this point, this was actually a planned implementation approach. This wasn't random. We got the European funding, we used it as a test of change, and then we went for the Tech programme funding to enable the full rollout across Scotland. 80% of our funding is allocated to a national CCBT licence, and the remaining 20% to the national team, which primarily consists of myself and no one else. So it must be quite expensive, I guess. The project deliverables. We were to support the expansion and adoption of CCBT across Scotland, stabilise the existing services in the 6 territorial health boards, develop CCBT services in the remaining 8 health board areas, ensure full geographical coverage of CCBT services in Scotland, increase access to psychological therapies by a total of 2,600 additional patients, so those patients sitting within the 8 developing health boards, and to develop sustained funding at local and national levels for CCBT. In terms of our progression to date, we started with our initial 2 services. That was 11% of the national population. By the end of MASTERMIND, we covered 44% of the national population. And by the end of this year, we anticipate we'll cover 100% of the national population. Actually, I have to be said, we're covering 99.6% of the adult population at this point in time, with Glasgow opening their service last week. Very exciting. It's worth stating at this point that all boards are signed up to develop and deliver CCBT and have a government-agreed targets to achieve. And just to look at those targets just now, so you can see there's a number of commencers. The targets were based on the rate of commencement in terms of implementation, but also in terms of population. So that's why Western Isles looks a lot more than Glasgow, for example. It's worth noting, though, that the targets are primarily used to maintain drive and focus in the implementation process. So this is really to ensure that the boards are maintaining the focus on the service delivery as well as developing their service further. And just to put that in context in terms of service growth, is a little table. So in 2013 we had 1,340 referrals for CCBT in Scotland. In 2017 so far we've had 8,577. CCBT now receives approximately 820 referrals per month, although this is going up because of Glasgow at this point in time. And it's expected that we'll reach 9,800 by the end of 2017. But actually I think that will go up beyond 10,000, again with the introduction of the Glasgow service. It's worth maybe picking up a little bit with the national licence. The national CCBT licence was secured in February 2016 and runs, 17 and runs until February 2019. The important aspect about this licence is not based on treatments, as so many other licences are. It's based on population. So in actual fact, we pay 5.5 pence for every individual in Scotland to access CCBT. What this allows us to do is to expand and grow the service with an unlimited amount of usage in terms of how many people can access it, but also in terms of where we can deploy CCBT and how we can use CCBT in the future. Beating the Blues at this point in time is the preferred programme, primarily because of its evidence base and its recommendation by Sign and NICE. However, we are reviewing the programme choice in 2018. One of the kind of key aspects about the implementation has really been the approach. What we've been able to do is pull together nationally a team of individuals that have genuine expertise in CCBT. Myself has been involved in the implementation and service delivery of CCBT since 2004. Our clinical lead, Professor Kevin Power, has been running his service since 2007. What we've been able to do then is transfer our expertise, knowledge, including policies, key documentation, advice and guidance, into initially the 4 MASTERMIND boards, pulling together the 2 existing health boards and their expertise and experience. The theory being that those 6 boards and the national team then transfer their knowledge into the 8 developing boards. This happens through a couple of structures. There's a national region meeting that happens every 6 months. We have a coordinators meeting, which happens every 6 months with national services participating. We also have a network of CCBT that sits underneath the service implementation. An important aspect of this style of service implementation is the reduction in time and costs. We've managed to reduce the average time from about 2 years to about 5 months in terms of its implementation. One of the key aspects when dealing with a multiple board implementation across the whole of Scotland is to ensure that we all follow roughly the same phases in approach. So there's a 5-phased approach that each board takes on. Phase 1 is service development, integration of psychology, and opening services to psychology, early engagement with GPs. Second phase is continued development and opening the service to GPs. Third is implementation of a marketing strategy, which I'll come back to later on. Phase 4, marketing strategy, but also then a period of service improvement. So the majority of services in Scotland are now in the service improvement phase, which lasts about 12 months. And the final phase is sustainability of service, which we're moving towards in 2018. It is important, though, that while we have a national approach, that we acknowledge that there's different needs and setups within the region. So we have a national model of implementation. However, what we do nationally and with the local boards is identify where the variations exist and develop different styles of implementation. So the service is localised and embedded into local structures. However, a key part of what we do during the implementation is to maintain the fundamentals of the original service model and ensure the same outcomes for patients and quality of service. How we do this really is by defining local objectives. So while this is a national project, the services are defined with local objectives in mind. So really, when we ask our services, we ask them what is the local vision of CCBT, to know what they want to achieve, how many referrals do they need or want, where's the service going to go after the development phase or after the project phase, how will they get there, and what will the impact be. These questions are asked before any start of implementation and are defined before CCBT launches. Another aspect of the CCBT implementation is the right service model. So currently we have 13 out of 14 health boards running CCBT services, all using the same service model. And how this works is we have one central coordinator, which tends to be a Band 4 or a team of Band 4 administrators. All referrals come into this one central point. We ask our referrers to maintain clinical responsibility and respond to our suicide alerts within the programme. What this effectively enables is for us to release the technology and ensure the levels of usage. What the coordinator does is logistically support the patients to complete the programme in their own homes or at community locations such as libraries. They'll work with the patients to identify barriers to treatment, technical barriers or logistical barriers such as childcare and various other things, and to help the patients to overcome these barriers and commence with treatment. What we intend to do is then embed this structure within psychology or mental health to offer opportunistic support to the service. However, we don't pay for clinical support within CCBT. Fundamentally, though, that the service is built on trust. We have to have trust in our technology that is going to achieve what we ask it to do in relation to the treatment of our patients, but we also have to trust our referrers to make good judgments. And on the whole, GP, psychology and mental health make very good judgments about CCBT. The key elements of implementation, our costs are limited to the software license and administration, the software license being a national cost, the administration being a local cost. We fully integrate our services into stepped or matched care models. We create multiple routes of referral across multiple disciplines. We spend a fair amount of time selecting the right workforce. As you can imagine, the coordinator post in the middle of the service is a very important one. We take a strategic approach to marketing. And we ensure a high level of commitment and effort in the participating boards. So this means engaging with high levels of clinical staff and managerial staff to ensure that CCBT is high on the agendas and local implementation. Another key aspect of our service is good communication structures, and throughout our administration processes and service processes and protocols, we ensure good communication. Good communication with referrers is vital because it allows us to create flexibility in the service, also the ability to manage referral patterns and deal with any clinical issues. Primarily what you're looking for in communication is to create clarity, remove confusion and set expectations within your referrer groups. Same can be said for patients. Patients that have better communication have greater motivation, increases their patience with the program, and actually leads to better outcomes. And again, the key aspect of communication with patients is clarity, understanding the patient about what the program is going to provide, and setting those expectations. Across the service, we actually have looked at multiple different styles of contact with patients to understand what is the best in terms of engagement and commencement. We found that phone is by far the most effective method of engaging with patients. That's personal contact, one-to-one, followed by text messaging services. Again, it's felt to be more personal and patients respond more to that approach. A formal letter is our third choice of communication, a formal letter with the logo. And the final one we actually found was email, which had proved not to be that effective, in particular at the early engagement stages of patients. Email was fine after the patient had indicated that was a preferred method of contact, but what we found is that the emails just weren't seen in email accounts. Clinical engagement, anyone that's ever tried to develop a service, let alone a tech service, knows that clinical engagement is vital to the success of the implementation process, but equally it's also one of the hardest things to achieve. What we do within CBT is we spend 2/3 of our project time on marketing and communication with referrer groups. What we mean by marketing effectively is structured, coordinated communication. This coordinated communication is across all of those involved in the running and implementation of CCBT. It's really designed to shape opinion and address negative perceptions. What it does is it delivers consistency across the messages, prevents confusion and creates clarity. What we attempt to do across our marketing strategy is to create 7 points of varying contact. So that's 7 points of contact with referrer groups. That can be achieved through things like newsletters, mailing, direct contact, presentations. But what you're looking for is 7 points to actually lead to action. However, the cautionary note is any marketing that you do creates expectation. And what's vital to marketing is that those expectations can be met. Why is communication so important and why is marketing so important? Really the 3 aspects on the screen: sustainability, referrals and impact. I feel it's by far the most important part of any implementation process, but it's also one of the most complex and subtle of tasks. It needs to be thought through and delivered well to achieve your goal. To do this, the marketing strategy becomes vital. The marketing strategy really is designed to identify clear targets, messages, and also helps you to define what you can and cannot do. Looking at scale of what you can achieve in relation to the resources you have, the funding you have, but also the time you have to actually go out and talk to individuals and referrers. The most important aspect of the marketing strategy is timing, which I'll come back to in a second. It's also important that a wee bit of time is taken to identify what the right levers are. So for CCBT, we have strong clinical evidence. There's a patient need. It's ease of access. We have a lot of research data that's collected. We also align CCBT to national agendas and strategies. We also now have the mental health strategy, which Action 25 states that all boards should have a CCBT service running by 2018. And back to timing. That was well timed, wasn't it? So timing is very, very important because timing is about expectation. When the timing is right, your service can live up to expectations and really allows the referrer to see what you're saying in your marketing. If, for example, that you're saying your service can be accessed within 7 days, you better make sure your service can be accessed within 7 days. Otherwise, what you do is leads to disappointment and disillusionment in your service. When your timing right, you do meet expectations. Your referrers will continue to refer, but more importantly, word of mouth, the recommendation happens between peer groups such as GPs. So when your timing is wrong, you do create disillusionment, disappointment. Your referrers will not refer again, but they'll also tell their colleagues. So word of mouth can be a very, very beneficial thing within marketing, but also be a very detrimental thing within marketing. What we've had to do within CBT is to create localised approaches based on the structures of the healthcare systems or services within each of the local areas. Taking Fife, for example, they were unable to access their GPs through cluster meetings at the time, so they needed to find different ways of engaging with GP groups. Lanarkshire had a very different setup and were able to directly contact and present to GPs through their cluster meetings, which there was 10 of across the Lanarkshire. One of the things I wanted to highlight in this slide is the huge surge in October in Lanarkshire's referrals. One of the things we found when we were doing the marketing is we kept telling GPs that Sky Gateway was coming. And when Sky Gateway came, they referred 600 in 1 month. So sometimes you have to be careful what you tell GPs because it's very literal. I think it's important that what you're doing is you're looking at your marketing strategy and you're not looking at one generic approach for all boards. Each board will have different structures and different ways of engaging with their GP or other referrer groups. This also relates to not just the environment that they're working, but also the attitudes and structures. But when it works, what you're effectively doing is increasing referrals exponentially over a relatively short period of time. But also in relation to CCBT, you reduce your unit cost. So that's your unit cost per patient. Effectively what you're doing within a CCBT service model is we have a model which has a set capacity at the beginning of the implementation process, and through the marketing process we're filling that service up. The more we fill up, the cheaper it becomes per patient. Easy. So one of the other key aspects that I want to touch upon in our presentation was really maximising data, and which really means maximising your understanding of what's happening within your services. Within MASTERMIND, I don't know if the word fortunate is what springs to mind, but what we're able to do is to collect a huge amount of data about CCBT, which also then developed a huge amount of understanding. Our data sat across 7 domains and an evaluation tool called MAST. But what it really meant was that the data was broken down into 3 key categories. We had patient data, organisation data, and health professional data. The organisation looked at the key barriers in terms of senior management attitudes, but also in terms of cost, as well as infrastructure of each of the local boards. We also looked at attitudes of health professional and the barriers that we need to overcome around those. What we've been able to do within MASTERMIND and Tech, though, is centralise our data collection. So in each of the local boards, we have mechanisms of data collection. So we have referral information, pre-treatment, post-treatment questionnaires, as well as the Beating the Blues programme itself. All of our data is collated within NHS 24 and extracted and put into a series of tables in a database. These tables and the data are then kind of filtered through a series of queries and a set of transformation tables as applied to the data. What this effectively means is you have 14 boards with the same data collected in the same way, which is then comparable across all the different boards. All the data collected is then also presented back to the regional meetings, so the boards will see their progress to date. So what it really means for the evaluation is all the health boards are collecting the same data and using the same collection tools. Collection is achieved through routine practice and administration processes, so there's not an external aspect of data collection, which means it happens every single day in the same way. We do collect it at a national level. We create benchmarking data which allows us to compare service performance, but also really identify areas where performance is perhaps higher than we expect and sharing good practice between the different boards. Which also then allows us to implement service improvements across all boards simultaneously. So at the 6-month regional meetings, we identify key areas of service improvement, we discuss them, and we talk about the implementation process. This is then monitored across the next 6 months until the next regional meeting. All the data is then analysed by the right individuals with the right expertise and understanding. And in relation to this, we also have a programme of research that runs in parallel with implementation. This is run in Tayside by Professor Kevin Power, and to date we have 1 publication with 3 others coming out from the MASTERMIND data and about 4 others identified. One of the key aspects of the kind of long-term success of CCBT has been the early planning of things like sustainability and marketing. So as an example, I started my job in August 2014. We started talking about sustainability in September 2014. We started talking about marketing in September 2014. This is vital because obviously what you're doing is you're planning not only the implementation approach, but your data collection, as well as the marketing at a national level and engaging with things like government representatives, for example. Very, very important that you don't think of sustainability as a kind of secondary aspect. It should be integrated all the way through the implementation approach. With that in mind, what we do is we are very clear about what we need. So from a very, very early stage, we defined what we needed to make sure CCBT was going to be sustained longer term. We have a sustainability model, which was then created. We had to ensure that that model was attractive both at local and national stakeholder levels. So with CCBT, our costs are split between the local territorial boards and the national organisations. Then we developed a funding strategy. So when we looked at the MASTERMIND project, we saw the opportunity that provided, but we had to have a way of, first of all, drawing the funding back into the Scottish realm, but secondly, also have a progression in our funding. So this wasn't about sustaining what we had, this was about expanding beyond where we were. And to do that, the first thing we had to do was to engage with funders early in the process, get them involved in the project and make them aware of the successes that we had. To do this, one of the first steps in our sustainability strategy was to map the existing structures. So looking at government policymakers, patient groups, heads of psychological services, third sector organisations, and really understanding where the key players would be in that process of ensuring funding longer term. Also in relation to that then, it was important that we aligned to the national agendas at the time, the 18-week referral to treatment targets, but also increasing access to psychological therapies. It's really due to this alignment that CCBT then became part of the national mental health strategy. And then finally, you're making the case. So the evidence of clinical outcomes, high demand, prove the value of cost effectiveness, the higher level of strategic context, you're showing the impact, showing the efficiency, and highlighting the impact on the patient journey. Okay, so that's CCBT to date, but what I wanted to share with you just in the last few slides, I'm sure you'll be thankful to know, really what CCBT means longer term for tech, or technologically enabled care within mental health. What we have effectively is the standard tier model within the mild to moderate at the bottom up to the more severe at the higher ranges. We have a range of technologies which are being rolled out just now in Scotland, VC, video conferencing through Attend Anywhere. We have remote monitoring, which is being a national programme of work through the tech programme. We also have aspects of education and prevention, which has been highlighted within the mental health strategy. When looking at the tiers, you can see very clearly that there's an overlap in terms of what we can do with the technology and the tiers that they sit within. To augment this, you can also use self-management tools such as apps to then enhance the patient experience while also providing valuable information to clinicians. But what's important about this model is we don't use technology in isolation. We have to use technology together to achieve the best possible services for our patients. I think too often when we look at technology and the implementation, we look at it in silos. We have one aspect of technology, but services will be developed using multiple technologies across all the tiers. But what we've managed to do in CCBT, which I think is important to highlight, is we've managed to create 14 service platforms of delivery. What this enables us to do is to effectively add in additional CCBT programs, self-management apps, as well as even more advanced technology like VC into these service platforms. Service platforms are ostensibly designed to ensure the patient and the referrer can get access to technology smoothly and support that process of engagement. What we're also able to do longer term is then look at NHS24 in terms of the role that they can play to support this implementation as we go forward. I think what we're looking at really is we have the service platforms that have the clinical governance, the managerial structures, but also the experience and expertise now of our coordinators and what can they offer a longer term. By extending this even further, we could look at things like remote clinics through the CCBT model, where you have your 14 services in local areas, and then maybe looking at 3 different styles of technology, such as CCBT, VC, or remote management of patients, and perhaps also looking at the creation of central hubs or hotspots to then allow specialties to be accessed across the whole of Scotland. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Chris. So I'm sure you'll agree that was fascinating, and it's just so amazing to see something that's been implemented so successfully across all team boards. Just to kick off, just to say, if you could put any questions you've got for Chris in the chat box, send to everyone, then we'll be. So we'll start with a question. Kirsty was just saying in the chat box that give some examples of her experience of engaging GPs. You've talked about GP engagement as important in the project, and I know it's a big issue for lots of psychological therapy services how to engage with their GPs. What do you think the secrets of successful GP engagement are?
I think the first one's hard work, to be honest. A lot of time and effort to really make the implementation work. I think really, if you're looking at how we've done it in CCBT, it's about understanding the kind of climate in terms of where you're working and what the key levers are in terms of GPs. What we've done in CCBT through the marketing strategy or creation of market strategies, you really try to understand what the GP attitudes are to the hosting services. So in relation to CCBT, that might be what's the attitude towards the psychology service, what's the attitude towards technology, has there been a pilot culture within your area, for example. And then what you're really doing through your kind of messages is finding a way of overcoming that through the discussions. CCBT is relatively easy because you have a strong evidence base, so it's recommended by NICE and SIGN. But also I think then it's about identifying those individuals within the local areas that can then support as a peer of GPs the implementation process. So what we tend to do is we tend to engage with senior clinicians, GP clinicians in each area. We'll get them to basically sign off the service protocols, the suicide alert protocol we have, and really what that allows you to do is when you go in to see a GP, you can say Dr. such and such has approved this, and it does make a big difference. But unfortunately, the only thing I can really say is it has to be a long-term strategy you take. When I did it originally in Forth Valley, it was an 18-month process to do the GP engagement. For things like Mastermind and Tech, it's been about a 12 to 15-month process, so it takes a lot of time and effort.
Great, and I think your colleague Kirsty was also underlining it's repeated, it's not a one-off event, yeah. It's something that you have to keep working at. That's great, thank you. Just to apologise, I'm getting reports that there's lots of background noise on the line, and I think it's just because we still have got some people who haven't muted, so I apologise for that if you just try to bear with us. Chris, you mentioned the importance of the right workforce and the coordinator role, and someone is asking, can you just tell us a bit more about that? For us, I suppose, when we looked at the coordinator post or the administrator post for CCBT, we identified pretty quickly that the core skill was not administration, the core skill is communication. And I think within the NHS, because of redeployment and various other things, we do tend to pick our administration people off a list, if I can say that. But actually the reality is for these kind of services, what you need to do is find the right individual with the right set of skills. For CCBT, that actually means people with customer services backgrounds, people that can manage calls, set barriers with patients and referrers, but also then understands the fundamentals of customer service and such that you be responsive, you're available, you're respectful of both the patient experience but also the referrer's knowledge. And what we do then in terms of our workforce is then the administration aspects. We build in systems that allow the administration to happen almost automatically. So when we look at our workforce, we identify very, very quickly the key aspects of the role. We identify quickly within a wider workforce what those skills translated into, and then we identify the right individuals. So the vast majority of our coordinators will not automatically come from an NHS background, but maybe from an external organisation. Okay, thank you. That's really interesting, and I think your coordinators have been showing their good communication skills here by using the chat box to give us interesting information about their services. A question from an eagle-eyed person who says, "How did you get your implementation time from 2 years to 5 months?"
A lot of that's to do with sharing good practice. So I think when we originally did it in Forth Valley, obviously we made a lot of mistakes, if I can say that because it was the first time we did it. We had the same issues within Tayside, and really what the issues were about were creating the infrastructure and the service, so understanding the clinical governance, understanding the managerial shape, also then looking at all the various processes and procedures and the data collection tools, various other things, so all really the infrastructure issues. What we were able to do within the implementation in this round was effectively to package up a service which was developed and evolved across many years in Forth Valley and Tayside and deliver it to a local structure who then, rather than building from scratch, were just refining what already existed into the local area. I think then when you looked at the national implementation team in its role, we work very, very closely with the boards, so we'll attend implementation meetings, GP meetings, and really are there just to make things go as smoothly as possible. So even things like information governance, which we all know can be a bit of an issue at times, dealing with e-health in different areas, and really just being there to support the implementation. And really what we found was just because of the combination of the different boards' experience, the expertise we had in a couple of the boards, and their ability to go in and problem solve, it really reduced the time down dramatically.
Brilliant, thank you. I think that's a great example of what we would call spread, if people are still looking out for QI bingo words, who attended the event last week. I've got a question here from Susie Cook to everyone, and I'm going to roll it in with something else actually. So what she's asking about is your thoughts on the introduction of other treatment modality to give patient choice. And I guess I was just reflecting on that you've got this platform which currently hosts Beating the Blues, but presumably your idea is that it has the potential to host a range of other programs. Absolutely. I think that I suppose part of my job and what I've tried to do is to almost disengage the technology from the service development. I think certainly a lot of the tech projects that happen locally and nationally, I think there's almost a fixation on the technology part, and the reality of the technology is simply a tool, a mechanism, and what you really need to do is develop a very solid service infrastructure which can then operate within the kind of confines of where it exists. So that means integration into step to match care models. It means ensuring that the service has the correct clinical governance as well as managerial structures, the correct presence within each of its local areas. But what we're able to do, I think, with the service platform is really to introduce new technology and new programs as required. I think certainly my long-term idea of what CCBD could look like is then having multiple programs for multiple different situations that covers things like long-term conditions, perhaps adolescents, and then going on to be more specialised for older adults, and even things like the prison population. And I think it all could be delivered through the same platform that's been created. So the theory being that the time saved and the investment saved would be that you already have the CCBD infrastructure in place. That's great, thank you, Chris. I've got a question from Gavin Richardson saying, fantastic example of implementation and great engagement from GPs. He's just wondering about do we have outcome data for the largest samples yet, or is it early days? Clinical outcome data. We actually collect clinical data almost every week because it's done as a standard part of what we do. So we have core data which is collected at the beginning of the first session, beginning of the fifth session as a midpoint, and then the end of the eighth session. And we analyse that pretty much continuously. So we have thousands and thousands and thousands of patients that have gone through this programme, so we have a lot of outcome data. Okay, great. And it's very positive, I should say that. Yeah. And it's available. When Chris says he has it, he means he actually has it. Yes, it's actually sitting there. Yep. Yes. One of the other issues that you talked about there, you had a really interesting slide on a sort of hierarchy of communication, which went from telephone calls through to emails, and it's clear that you've learned from your experiences of which ones hit the mark more successfully. I wondered, you mentioned text message systems, and I wondered if you might say something about what systems you've used. Absolutely. I think certainly the early days of Mastermind, we relied predominantly on email as our method of communication. Being a tech service, we felt that was appropriate. And really what we got was an incredibly slow and very small amount of commencement rates. We didn't have patients engaging at all. So about 3 months into Mastermind, we changed our approach. And at that point in time, we were piloting and gramping the use of a telephone call primarily to engage with patients.
And really what it showed was that the personal touch was really, really important. It didn't have to be from a clinician, it could be from your Band 4 administrator, but it was really important for patients to know that there was somebody behind the programme that was there to support the patient throughout. Obviously telephone calls, being the gold standard, are not necessarily that practical because people are at work, there's all sorts of ways engaging. So what we did then is we started looking at other mechanisms of engagement, and within Lanarkshire what they were able to do was to pilot the Flow system. So Flow, or Florence as it's properly, is an automated text messaging service, and really what it does is it engages the patients at every single session throughout their treatment. And what we discovered with text messaging in particular is that it still had aspects of a personal touch. Patients responded to it very, very quickly. They even responded to the automated texts as well as personalised texts that we sent out to the patients. And really what it allowed us to do was to create those personal links between the service and people completing the service at home. When we looked at other methods such as email and letters, we certainly found that the compliance rate was a lot lower as well as the commencement rates. So at this point in time, our Flow system achieves the same level of commencement as our telephone, for example, so it's proving as good as at that point. What it's not doing to the same extent is to maintain people throughout the course of treatment. That's definitely still the phone call, definitely the best.
That's great, Chris, and I think that's really helpful because I know from coming round that lots of boards are experimenting with using telephone calls and text reminders for various things. It's just really interesting to hear that rich experience that your team has gained from testing different things out, and I guess of course that would fit very much with our view of the world, which is all about doing small tests and seeing what works and adapting, adopting or abandoning as appropriate. Here's another one. Could you say a bit more about the management of clinical risk? I know this is a question from Gavin Richardson, and I know that's been a big issue for the programme.
It has. I mean, I think there's probably two aspects to this. I think what we have within the programme is a suicide alert. So every patient that completes a session will be asked a series of questions at the beginning of the session, one of which is if you've had suicidal thoughts in the past week. If the patient indicates yes, the programme will then ask a further two questions. One is the amount of times you've thought about suicide in the last week, which can be once, twice, 3 times or greater than 3 times, and the second question being the level of intent on a scale of 0 to 8. What happens after the patient will answer those questions is one of two messages will come up. The first message will indicate, if you wish to talk about this, please contact your referrer, NHS 24 or the Samaritans. For anyone that has an intent level of 5 and above, it will ask them to stop using the programme and then follow the same instructions. So contact your referrer, NHS 24 or the Samaritans. What will happen within the programme is that it's monitored on a daily basis by the local coordinator, who will then report the suicidal thoughts back to the referrer. So the referrer maintains clinical responsibility. Those thoughts are reported back to the referrer to make the decision about what to do next, effectively. So for a large number of patients, it will just be a simple phone call from the GP practice. Sometimes they may be referred up to the duty team. Other times there may be no action based on the GP's knowledge of the patient. The important aspect about our clinical governance structures is that the risk mitigation happens in 2 different levels. One with the referrer, who should be excluding anybody that's had suicidal thoughts, and second within the programme, who's obviously giving clear instructions to the patient as to what to do next. When we report the information, it's simply done to ensure that the person and the clinician is able to make the right decision in relation to that potential risk. The protocol we have was actually developed in 2005 by a GP and myself on the telephone over 45 minutes, but it's been a very robust protocol, which was then developed for the MASTERMIND programme into a national policy for CBT, which has been through countless different quality assurance processes. So it's a very robust way of governing, I think, the suicide risk. I think it's also worth noting that there's never been an incident with CBT. These are mild to moderate patients, so those that are coming through who are maybe more severe are heavily supported by another service such as psychology or the CMHTs.
Yeah, and I guess that comes back to your point, Chris, about good engagement with GPs and a relationship of trust, such that
absolutely,
we will give you access to this programme for your patients if we can trust you that the right people will come, and that we won't be managing too high a level of risk within the programme.
Absolutely.
Quick question, I think, which will be the last question, from Sheila Ross asking, can you say a bit about access points to the programme?
Community locations, presumably, so that the patients can access the programme really in two different ways. They can access it at home through their own browser and their own equipment, which is by far the most predominant way now that people use CBT. So this is done, I think, by about over 90% of patients now. I think also in relation to community locations, we now have community libraries, where our patients are able to access a kind of location. And she's talking about referral.
Yes, referral.
I think it's worth also mentioning about the community locations that the library staff on site are fantastic at dealing with patients, and it's a really good way of getting people into the programme. But in relation to referral routes, I think we have about 23 different services now referring into CBT across Scotland. And really what we look for is not to restrict access, but to ensure that the service that's referring in can manage the clinical governance, so it's managing the suicide alert. I think at this point we have areas like audiology, cardiology, diabetes now referring in. We obviously open up to all mental health services across each of the areas, psychology and GPs. However, GPs are still the most predominant, with about 85% of all referrals coming from GPs. What we're really trying to do is trying to get the solid base of referrals developed during this implementation approach, and then locally areas such as Fife, for example, who have really pioneered this, are taking on really opening up the service to as many different services as possible.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, Chris. That's been really informative, and I can think of 6 million other questions that I have for Chris. I'm sure you can too. We'll post the recording of the WebEx and the slides to you by email. And just finally, for me to say thank you all for calling in, and please hold the date for our next event, which is a QI Masterclass on the 7th of February in Edinburgh. We're going to be helping teams who identify themselves as having quality improvement projects who'd like to come along and hear from the experts at East London about how they've developed their QI programmes, and to give you some case studies from psychological therapy services, and then for our ELFT colleagues and the MASTERMIND team to work with you to move your project on and help you get started. So please do get in early and apply for the masterclass. Thank you very much, and goodbye.